welcome to the first video in our series covering ecology, which is the scientific study of how organisms, that being multiple types of living things, interact with other organisms, as well as how they interact with the non-living parts of the environments in which they live. Now, in this video, we're going to cover the terminology that is used by ecologists to describe different groups of organisms and how they interact. And it's probably easiest if we take a look at an animal that everybody can visualize, this wolf here. So whether you know it or not, this singular wolf here is an example of an organism, because an organism is simply defined as a single living thing. However, this singular wolf here is pretty boring for ecologists to study, because we can't look at how this wolf interacts with other organisms if there are no other organisms. So if we go to this second picture here, this group of wolves represents what we call a population, which in ecology is defined as a group of the same species of organism that all live within the same environment. So the wolves in this picture are defined as the same species because a male wolf and a female wolf can reproduce with each other and make baby wolves, which defines them as the same species or the same type of organism. However, obviously, these wolves would not be able to survive in an environment if they are the only population that exists, because wolves need other organisms to eat. So if we take a look at the picture below, we can see examples of multiple types of populations that are all within this environment here. So we see our population of wolves, and we see these three are going after some sort of dead animal. But in the picture, we can also see a second population of crows or ravens that also want to get this nice, juicy, dead animal here. And we can see these wolves look like they're fighting over the dead animal with the ravens here. So because we have multiple populations of different species of organisms that are all living within the same environment, now we can begin to see the different interactions between these organisms that exist. And together, the ravens and the wolves, and even the trees that represent a plant population, these three populations together are what we call a community. However, ecologists are still not satisfied with this, because a community does not include the non-living parts of the environment in which all of these communities or all of these separate populations are living. So if we take a second to think of the non-living parts, well, we can see most of this picture has snow in it, and we know that snow is frozen water, and water is not alive. So if we consider the snow to be part of this environment as well, that is one example of a non-living component. Another one is the sunlight that keeps these plants alive, and the oxygen in the air that all of the wolves and crows use to breathe. So when we include all of the communities within a single environment, and when we group those together with the non-living components of the environment, this is what we call an ecosystem, because once again, all of the living components in this environment would not be able to survive and interact with each other if not for the non-living components. And if we zoom out a little bit more, if we look at ecosystems that occur in specific geographic locations, these are examples of what we call biomes. So this example here is probably some sort of northern forest that you would expect to see in northern Canada. So that is one example of a biome. This biome here, with mostly sand, very little plant life, and very, very little rainfall, this we know as a desert. And this is an example of a type of biome. If we go into northern Canada, as well as northern Europe and northern Asia, this here is an environment that you would expect to see. Again, quite cold throughout the year, very little rainfall, and very little plant growth beyond simple grasses. This is an example of a tundra, which is another type of biome. We won't see this type of biome very much in Canada, but in Central Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Amazon rainforest, that gives us a name about what this biome is called, that being a rainforest biome. And of course, if you live in Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Manitoba, as well as Central Asia or Central Africa, an example of another biome is a grassland. So again, all of these are examples of ecosystems that occur in specific geographic locations. Now, if we zoom out all the way to the outside of the Earth and look at every single biome that occurs in Earth, because all life between each of the biomes is connected in some way, this is what we call Earth's biosphere, meaning all biomes that exist in different parts of the Earth. And again, because we're talking about a biosphere, this indicates that we're looking at the living components of everything that makes up the Earth. But as we remember, the non-living components, everything that isn't alive, is equally important, because life would not be possible without it. So the first non-living component of the Earth is what we call the atmosphere. The atmosphere is really important because this is all of the gas that makes up Earth. So we know that the most important gas for humans and basically all animals to survive is oxygen. We really need that. Carbon dioxide, even though we recognize it as a pollutant or a greenhouse gas, is important for keeping Earth's temperature relatively stable. And a third gas that the atmosphere is made of, that explains why the atmosphere is blue, is nitrogen. So all of these are examples of gases that make up the atmosphere. Another very important component of the non-living parts of the biosphere is all of the water that exists on Earth. You cannot go more than 3 to 4 days without water before you dehydrate and die, and therefore the water component of the biosphere is what we call the hydrosphere. Hydro, again, referencing water, and this includes water in its solid form, so the ice caps that exist in the Arctic and Antarctic, the liquid forms, which is most of the water on Earth, and the gas forms that actually make up a component of the atmosphere as well. So we see even among the non-living parts, there is some crossover. Finally, plants would not exist without this part, the solid part of Earth. This is what we call the lithosphere. So litho is a Greek prefix that means stone. So the lithosphere is simply the solid part of Earth that is mostly made out of different type of rocks that allow living things that require land in order to survive. And this includes the top layer of the Earth, which is the crust, and the upper part of the inside of the Earth, which is what we call the mantle. This is the outside solid part of the Earth. This concludes our first video, in which we introduce the different terms that ecologists use for the different levels of organization that exist on Earth. Before the next video, you can try the practice problems below that simply test whether you are familiar with the different levels of classification of groups of organisms, and in the next video, we'll be able to take a look in more detail at the different interactions that exist.